Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 297. We're coming now to the close of the month of Shvat and the beginning and opening of the month of Adar, the middle of this week, Rosh Chodesh Adar. Every month has its own energy, has its own unique personality and unique opportunities. Month of Adar, Mazel Dogim, its sign is a fish, which is always a sign of blessing. Bori Mazli, which means that Mazel is a healthy Mazel, and it's the key theme and energy and power of this month is joy. Mishanichnas Adar marbim b'simcha. When Adar enters, we increase in joy. So that's a great way to open a My Life Chassidus Applied episode, and this episode is dedicated appropriately in honor of Mendy and Chaya Bina Jacobson upon their wedding. Rosh Chodesh Adar of this week, dedicated by the Jacobson family. So yes, we'll start with that. Joy, simcha. We're told that it's a mitzvah, Ivdus Hashem b'simcha, to serve God with joy. As I just said, that's all year round. And in the month of Adar, specifically, marbim b'simcha, we increase in joy. And as the Rebbe emphasizes time and again, that like all matters of holiness, Mailan B'Kedesh, that means the increase of joy is every day of Adar, we increased one day after the next more and more. Now joy, joy is a complicated sentiment because some people say, I'm just not a happy person. Some people say, what can I do to become joyous? It seems to be impossible to regulate an emotion. If good things happen to me, I can be joyous. If bad things happen, I can't. But then the Torah would never tell us to be joyous, to serve with joy. And it says Mivdus Hashem b'simcha. It's a mitzvah. And a mitzvah cannot be asked of us to do if we're not capable of doing it. It wouldn't make any sense. It would be actually cruel. That tells us that joy is in the capacity and the reach of each one of us. No matter what you're going through in life, joy is a resource, an asset that is the birthright of every human being. Simply put, your soul is a naturally joyous entity. Look at children. Except perhaps in some extenuating circumstances that are unhealthy, every child is born naturally joyous, naturally giggles, naturally happy. It's only later when they learn from adults that impress upon them, impressionable children, that there's a thing called being sad. And I'm not talking about sadness a child cries because it's in pain. I'm talking about a more ongoing form of sadness. So joy is the natural state of the human being. Why? Because the soul knows exactly why it's here. It was sent here by God on a divine mission. And when you know why you're here, you know the purpose. That itself is joyous. That means you're needed. It means you're indispensable. It means that you're not negligible. You can't be dismissed. You can't be silenced because your voice, your song, your expression is exactly what is necessary in this world. Imagine you had that feeling all the time, 24/7. That's joy. Joy doesn't always mean dancing and celebrating always the most obvious way. Joy is also an internal state that you are, in a way, constantly happy. You're in a happy place. Now, when what happens, something negative may happen, that doesn't take away from your natural joy of your soul. That means now the natural joy has to now navigate through these difficult challenges. We were coming last week from Chav Shvat, the 22nd of Shvat, the yahrzeit, the 32nd yahrzeit of the Rebbe Chaim Mushke. She was once asked, when was the happiest time of your life? So, what most people would say, they think back, when was that special day, or when I was a child, or when there was something happened. Her response, right now. Which of course carries the profundity, the message that always, the now was always the happiest. If you had asked her a year before, she would have said then. Because a happy person is a state of being. It's not a verb. Joy is not just a verb meaning an action. That when you're acting happy, you're happy. It's a state of constant happiness. Teiv leiv mishta tamid. As the end of Shulchan Aruch Chaim, which talks actually about the laws of Purim cotton, when there's a Shnasa Ibor, a leap year, Purim cotton. So the end is Teiv leiv mishta tamid. And as brought already by commentaries, and the Rebbe cites it, the beginning of Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim is also Tamid. Shavisi Lashem L'Negdi Samid. I stand humbled. I stand. Everything is equalized as I stand before God, always Tamid. And the second Tamid, there were two Tamid in the Beis Hamikdash, the Korban Tamid in the morning and the afternoon, is that then Tev Lev Mishta Tamid. That Tev Lev, good heart, that is Mishta Tamid, always celebrating. Tamid. Or how could you say Tamid? Tamid means even when you're asleep, yes, because a happy person is a happy person 24/7. That happiness takes on different shapes and forms. So as we go into the month of Adar, that's our first lesson and message, which is that there's a simcha lying within you. It's about accessing it. And it's a state of being as well as an action. The mitzvah is to bring that state of being, that natural state, into action, actualization, and concretizing it in real life. We're also going to be speaking, since this is the week of Parshat Terumah, we'll talk about Terumah. But before I say that, I should have really announced it earlier, but let me say this is a few hours left now to this annual, 6th annual My Life Chassidus Applied Contest. The deadline is 11:59 tonight, meaning late Sunday, midnight tonight, basically. And this year, as you know, there's the essay track for the $10,000 first prize, $3,600 second prize, $1,000 third prize, and a $500 student prize. And then there is also the extra track that we made this year, a special track, a creative track, an artistic track. All the details and guidelines, and you have only a few hours left, but you know what? It's never too late, are available at chassidusapply.com/contest. So grab the opportunity. This is the last few hours to put your final touches on it and show it to someone. Make sure that you follow the guidelines. We've already gotten quite a few submissions. And I say again and again, many submissions lack sometimes following simple guidelines. For example, in the artistic track, it requires an opening paragraph written, a cover note saying what you're going to do. Simple things, just explain what you're doing. That counts for points. Follow the guidelines, and we're excited, and we'll be announcing the judges. They're prestigious judges, both for the essays, judges for the artistic track, a special Hebrew contest, which is actually has its own deadline with its own prizes, and that you can find at diralo, diralo, .org, .com actually, diralo.com, which is the Israeli track, and there you can find all the details about that Hebrew contest. Okay, so again, this is the final call, last hours, and please do your best, and you can win that $10,000 first prize. Okay. So now let's talk about Parshat Terumah. Parshat Terumah. So Parshat Terumah, of course, has many themes. One is the most prominent one, that it carries the third pillar after the Jews left Egypt and the parting of the sea. Then came Matan Torah, the receiving of the mandate, and then came the third stage, all in this book of Shmos, of Exodus, building of the Mishkan. V'osi lemigdash v'shachanti b'seichem. So the chapter begins with God telling Moses to go to the people and gather their donations. Vayichuli truma, kesef, zav, and chesed, silver, gold, copper, and all the other materials. And then v'osili migdash, and he shall build for me a sanctuary. V'shachanti b'seichem, I shall dwell among you. This is the shortest mission statement of all. V'shachanti b'seichem, 2 words. The mission of all existence, that God should dwell among you. In the words of the Medrash, Nesavar Kadosh Baruch Hu liyas le'yizbarach dira b'tachtenim. God desired to have a home in the lowest of worlds, the material world. And the Mishkan is the microcosm of that home. So it carries within the mission of all our lives. When a person is able to be focused with that, you can rest assured that there's a joy. You know why you're here. You take all your life and you go to that focal point that connects all the fragmented details toward the purpose. So that's just an opening Chassidus applied just from the statement itself of the building of the Mishkan. But we received a number of questions, and sometimes they're on the Parsha, so I will address some questions connected to this, as well as some connection to last week's Parsha that we read yesterday, Parsha Mishpatim. So let's begin with this question. Now that we've established what the purpose is, so we know, let me just elaborate a bit more, that this mitzvah of Asur Limigdash Shachanti B'Seichel is a mitzvah, it's nitzchi, it's always a mitzvah tmidis, meaning it's always a mitzvah. That's why the building of the Beis Bayis Rishon later, by Dovid HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech, and then Bayis Sheni, are all an extension of this Asur Limigdash. So it began with the portable sanctuary, the Mishkan that they carried and they traveled with through their 40 years, the wilderness. Then later there was Mishkan Shiloh, and there were other Mishkans that were still temporary abodes. And then came the permanent Beis HaMikdash on the place where God chose, Har HaNivcher, the place, HaMokem Asher Nivcher, that God chose for the Beis HaMikdash, Bayis Rishon Yerushalayim, Har HaBayis, as we know it today. And that was a permanent place. The temple was destroyed, but Kedusha Le'Zazim and Kemo. The holiness never leaves that place. That's why you're not allowed to go on the Temple Mount. And then came the second Beis HaMikdash. Until this day, we're waiting for what? For the final third Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi. Migdash Adnei Keinu Yodecha, a temple that will be permanent. And that is one of the signs of coming of Mashiach, as the Rambam says. So here someone asks a question. Why can we not build the third temple by ourselves? Why do we have to wait? Since it's a mitzvah, why not just build it? It says in Parshas Terumah, Asur Limigdash Shachanti B'Seichel, translated, and they shall make me a sanctuary and I will dwell in their midst. They means us. We are told that we have to make it. So why can't we hire an architect, make a crowdfunding page to pay for it, and build the third Beis HaMikdash by ourselves? Very good question, right? Well, Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni, as well as Asur Limigdash, was a tzivi from the Eibishter. The Eibishter commanded it. And yes, that command is a permanent command. But the timing of when to build a Beis HaMikdash is completely up to God. The famous Sikha that the Rebbe Rebbe said when he came out of prison, at the Yud Beis Tammuz, citing his father in the Sikha that the father said, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu imonu v'imavesenu. And he says, Nicht mit unser Rotzen sein wir areis von Golus. Nicht mit unser Rotzen sein wir areis von Golus, and nicht mit unser Rotzen will wir areis gehen von Golus. Meaning, not with our will did we go into Golus. If it was up to us, we would never have allowed the Beis HaMikdash to be destroyed. It was up to God. And not with our will we go out of Golus. This will be up to Hashem, to God. The Eibishter, God. Now, that does not mean that we cannot do things that expedite the process. Maseinu v'avedesenu, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, our work is the keli, makes the container when we transform the world and we prepare it for the Gula, then will come the response, go build the Beis HaMikdash. So the Rambam says in Halacha, in Hilchos Malachim, chapter 11, the end of his magnum opus Mishnah Torah, he says, after he explains the criteria, what makes someone cheskas Mashiach, presumed to be Mashiach, someone born to the house of David, someone who keeps Torah mitzvahs, who influences, inspires others, battles a war. Then it says when he wins that battle, and then even the Beis HaMikdash, and he builds the Beis HaMikdash b'mkeimei, in its right place, and gathers all the Jews from the exiles, kibbutz golius, then we know he's Mashiach Vadei. He does not do this himself. Mashiach does not come because he wants to, or because we want him to. It's when God decides the time has come. How does God decide? We're told, you do your work, and I will make that decision. We don't have the right or the possibility of just deciding when we're going to build the Beis HaMikdash, because it's not just a physical building. Yes, you can build a house. This physical building needs an environment where you can have a pure environment where you can serve in that Beis HaMikdash to serve whom? God. This isn't just our choice when we're going to build a new shul, or even build or a home, or even a new shul. This is a particularly unique home, and that is the home for God, v'shachanti b'seichel. So it's very clear that this is not something in our hands, halachically and so on. There have been movements that have suggested that, but it was never accepted in any mainstream halachic way. And even those that say that it's possible have to bend over backwards to find real sources for it, that without God's direct instruction to Mashiach. Now there is a discussion, what comes first? Is it the first all the gathering of the exiles to Israel, or then Kibbutz Nitzchei Yisrael, and then Bayis Yivin, and then you build a house? Or the other way around? And the Friedrich Rebbe Rashab has a famous Igeris, a long letter about it in English Kodesh. But that's not relevant to our discussion here. The point being is, what we have to do is our part. Now, is someone moving to Eretz Yisrael part of it? Some say that may be part of it. The Rebbe spoke about the fact that many Jews going to Eretz Yisrael is definitely a stepping stone toward the Geula. But the point is, we can't force God's hand. At the same time, we don't stand by passively. We do whatever it takes that the Torah tells us what to do. Torah and mitzvahs, the things we were told to do. So clearly we have a mandate, we have instructions, but not directly building it. So as much as we'd be desirable and what we'd like and so on, it's not how it works. Because as I said, the Beis HaMikdash is not just a building, you have to have this presence of the Shekhinah there. It means you have to have God's cooperation, and I would say even more than cooperation, God's wish that that time has come, and that you can fulfill everything you need to do in the Beis HaMikdash. It's not just a sightseeing tour, God forbid. It's not just a tourist attraction. It's a place of holiness, where offerings are brought, where all the services that are done in the Beis HaMikdash are done, and that's where all the shleimus of mitzvahs, as the Rambam explains, all the mitzvahs that will be able to come to fruition when the Beis HaMikdash is there. And as long as the Beis HaMikdash is not there, there are many mitzvahs that can't be done in the fullest sense of the word. Some can't be done at all. And that is a divine edict and a divine commandment that we are awaiting. But again, this does not mean we stand by idly. We have an active role, especially how the Rebbe emphasizes, tut al v'seken, do whatever you can, which is through our refining of the world, learning about Geula, teaching about it, living with it, preparing the ground that we can then open our eyes and see the Geula is upon us, and then God says, okay, here's the time, here's Mashiach, rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, and all that follows. So, let's now go over to some questions on last week's Parsha. So we talked about in Parsha Mishpatim, so here was a few questions that came in. Why does the Torah list many thou shalt nots in Parshas Mishpatim? Parsha Mishpatim, remember, comes after Parshas Yisro. Yisro was this chapter where we read about Sinai, the revelation, and the giving of Torah and mitzvahs. Then comes Mishpatim, ve'ela Mishpatim, and continues, these are the laws, many laws. So the question was asking, why are there so many shall nots? Meaning, Loisa said, do not do, in Mishpatim, which comes chronologically after this parting of the sea in Parsha B'Shalach. So the Jews left Egypt. Then on their way, 7 days later was the parting of the sea, Shvi Shel Pesach. And 49 days later from leaving, 50 days later was the mountain Torah. And then followed that was Mishpatim. So the question is asking, why there's so many shall nots after they parted, after this, they witnessed the parting of the sea, after seeing open miracles at the splitting of the sea? How is it even possible that someone would do a sin? Yeah, I have the same question. It's a very good question. However, the question, unfortunately, is a much broader one. And what about after seeing the miracles in Mitzrayim? Is it only the parting of the sea? And what about after the miracle, after the revelation at Sinai itself, and then they went ahead and built a golden calf? So I'm not sure why Dafka, the laws of Mishpatim that talk a lot about the legislature, yes, it talks about laws of litigation, many thou shalt nots. I mean, they did the cardinal sin of building a golden calf. Not taking away from your question, I'm just adding to it. And what about Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve in Garden of Eden, where they had everything? Paradise. Yitzir Kapav Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, created by God himself. And still they fell? The answer is, that's exactly how the world works. God created an agnostic universe. His presence created the world with the divine presence revealed there. But at the same time, left room for free will. And we have the animal soul. And ein adam ever avera elim kein nichnus beiruach shtus. You ever wonder what that means? It says a person does not do a sin unless they enters in them a spirit of folly. Some say shtus, insanity, a spirit of madness. Why? It's coming from Yetzer Hara. You have an evil temptation, you're tempted, seduced to do something negative. Why is the Talmud dismissing it as some type of ruach shtus? Like some new spirit, some weird spirit, strange spirit entered you. Because an aveda by nature means displacement, havara. Aveda from the word havara, mirashus l'rashus. You moved away, you're misaligned from your purpose. Mitzvah means connection, tzavsa v'chibur. When you're aligned, misaligned, the machine not aligned with its purpose. So no normal person would put their hand in fire, right? No normal person would do a sin that hurts their soul and hurts their life's purpose. So how's it possible? Says the Gemara Ruach Shtus. That moment they weren't normal. Something abnormal going on. Something not natural. So God allowed in this existence the possibility for that to happen. Which means you could see a miracle, you could see many miracles. You could see them in the most revealed way, but still there's that other voice. You still need to make the effort that live by what you've seen. So a miracle is not a guarantee that everything's going to go well. A miracle, yes, is a wake-up call, it's a revelation, and if you appreciate it and you have gratitude that they said, Oz Yashir, it can help, but at the end of the day, it's a choice we make. You see people who see no miracles, and they make the right choices. You've seen people who lived privileged lives and given all the miracles. There's a very powerful letter from the Rebbe, where he compares Adam Mechav and Gan Eden to Rachmana litzlan, Hoyel Esiya, a person in Auschwitz. Adam Mechav and Gan Eden had everything. They had everything. They didn't have to work. There were no pain, no labor pains. Everything was smooth. Paradise itself. And yet, what happened? They ate from the tree of knowledge. They transgressed. There are people who lived in a concentration camp, had nothing, deprived of it all, tortured, oppressed, the most dehumanized way, most obscene way. And yet, they woke up and said, Modani. And they had gratitude to God. So you see, having revelation, having things very beautiful, and God's presence doesn't always mean guarantee that you're going to act on it. It's all about a person's choice. Okay. The next question, about slavery. Hi. Thanks for your classes. I'm looking out every week for them. I've learned today's portion of the Torah, and we learn about slavery. Yeah. Right. In the beginning, kisikna avadivri, then goes on different types of servants and slaves. I found it hard to understand the concept of selling a daughter for a maidservant, and even more that the boss should marry her. This is a minor girl and the boss is an old man. Why should we think this will be a good match? So I discussed this very directly in episode 246, which would be exactly a year ago, this mishpat. And just briefly, a few things that need to be pointed out. The word slavery, we all associate obviously with oppressive slavery, like the slavery of the Jews in Egypt, or the slavery in contemporary times, whether it's the black slavery in America, or other countries that enslaved a minority or a majority, and we see that as tremendous oppression, and it is. It's an inhumanity. The Torah also does. That's why you find that when a Eved Divrei who sold himself into slavery in order for financial reasons, excuse me, when he wants to remain with his master, it's not a simple thing, because God says, you're my servant. You're not the servant of my servant. And they pierce a hole in his ear, because this is the ear that heard, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. So we see it's not a positive thing as well. Nevertheless, what's most important to remember is that the slavery talked about in the Mishpatim is not the word slavery that we always use. That's not the right word to use. It's more servitude, servant. First of all, the Eved Divrei that I just said is not placed into slavery. He himself sold himself. There are people who cannot pay their debts, so one of the ways was to serve. We have servants today too. They're called waiters. They're called doormen. They're called taxi drivers. We don't call them slaves because there are guidelines, but the Torah has guidelines as well. I elaborated a lot more in that program, but the point being is the Torah is humanistic. God would never allow a person to be tortured, a person to be mistreated, and all the laws, if you look at the laws of the servitude in this chapter, you'll find that you have actually an obligation, and it's not very appealing to have a servant, because you have obligations that actually precede even your own rights. There are rights, not to mention what happens after by Shemitah and Yovel, the release of all servants. So it was a financial matter. In those days, that was one of the ways people, they sold themselves, they allowed themselves to become servants for pay. As far as the Omei Evriya goes, if you look at the laws again, they are very humane. And here again, it was a financial reason. And yes, if you want to keep her, you have to marry her. That was actually considered noble. She's not your slave. She's not your servant. She's your wife. That's why there are those rules. So you really look into it and get rid of the stereotype slavery as in history. It's a very different type of servant, and servitude is in Parsha Mishpatim. We never advocated such a thing. Slavery was never considered to be the way we understand slavery, as totally abolishment of people's rights, abnegation, I should say. Abolition was actually the abolition of slavery. The total abnegation of a person's complete rights. They were creating the divine image, and so on. Now, Chassidus talks about the idea of an Eved Ivri, an Eved Knani, Eved Neman, Eved Poshut, different servants as examples of serving God, which of course lifts the whole thing up to another level, which is how Chassidus explains this chapter. Okay. Since I mentioned previous episodes, let me go back. Adar and Terumah I also discussed in episodes 56, 102, 152, 201, and 247. These cross-referenced archives can be found at ChassidusApply.com, where you also have the place to submit the essays and all the details about the essay, previous essay contest posted so you can see examples of good essays, as well as a forum where you can submit anonymously any question you like. Okay. Next question about Parshas Mishpatim. Actually, I have two more on Mishpatim. The Parsha teaches prohibition against mixing meat with milk. If we mix chesed and gevurah, do we not get teferes? So the details of this. The Parsha teaches us not to mix meat and milk. Right? And from there we derive not to mix meat and milk. According to the Zohar Parsha Mishpatim 125a, the questioner asks, meat represents gevurah and milk represents chesed, and shouldn't be mixed. You don't mix gevurah and chesed. My question is, if we mix chesed and gevurah, don't we get teferes, which is the perfect balance of chesed and gevurah? Correct? You find in Chassidus, you find in many places, hiskalulus, the idea of interconnectivity, complementation of two forces actually creates a more powerful force. Teferes, beauty, is a combination of the red and the blue, or the white and the red of chesed and gevurah. Teferes is beauty. Like all things beautiful, it's a combination, and we see it as harmony. So why suddenly does it say that chesed and gevurah shouldn't be mixed as in bosar b'chalav? The same question can be asked not just in the world of animals, which is meat and milk, but also in the world of vegetation. We have the issue of klayim. Certain vegetation should not be mixed together, should not be grafted. We have klai behem also. Certain animals should not be bred together. And we have shatnez, linen and wool. On the other hand, shatnez in tzitzis is allowed, and the kohanim, their garments did have both. So which one is it? Is it allowed to mix the two or not allowed? So this is not the first time the question has been asked. This is a question that's asked in Chassidus. We'll begin with Eira Teira Nach, on Nevi'im Ksuvim, page 132. And then Lekutei Sichos Chelik Chof Tes, volume 29, page 122, from two powerful sichos, three I should say, Mishpatim, that the Rebbe spoke about, Mishpatim Tavshin Lamed Hey, Lamed Vav, and Tavshin Mem. So the Rebbe actually spoke on that Zohar, in Mishpatim, that his father discusses, the Rebbe's father, in Lekutei Levi Yitzchak. Briefly, the answer is that yes, mixing chesed and gevurah has in it tremendous quality, but it has to be done in the right way. In Kedusha, his skalus can be not just healthy, can actually reach the highest levels. But in Klippa, where there's no bittul, where there's no humility, where there's self-interest, then mixing things can actually be destructive. So the famous Rabbeinu Bachai, when he explains Klayim and the Sachrish in Parsha Kiseitzei, not breeding and not mixing animals as well as vegetation and other forms of mix, says because Mavalbul the Bria, you're disturbing the entire structure God created. God created boundaries. He created parameters. And when you mix things, you're mixing and disturbing the structure. For example, a person says, let's graft the windpipe, the air pipe, and the food pipe. God forbid. There are boundaries that are necessary for the survival of existence itself. So then how do we find exception? Because when there's special Kedusha, either a special mitzvah from the Torah, that God says this is what you do under these circumstances, or there's the proper bittul, where you have a complete, there's no self involved, there's a certain selflessness, then you get Iskalus and Gedusha, the concept of chesed and gevurah being mixed together. Who decides when yes, when no? That's where the Torah comes. The Torah says when it's allowed, when it's not allowed. More elaboration, look in the sources, a very fascinating subject matter. So we see in life, there's boundaries, but there are places where there's complete coexistence and there's cooperation and there's complementation. It's part of existence itself. Things complement each other. So you have to know where it complements each other and where it can be destructive. When the fox says to the fish, come out and live with us on land, that was destructive. The fox was looking for a meal. When a bee pollinates a flower and takes the nectar to move it elsewhere, that's a scholars, that's a Gedusha, in Teva, that meant to be that way. So you'll find in nature both elements, places where opposites should not be mixed together and places where opposites should be mixed together and actually bring something greater, a greater composite. Look in chemistry, in nuclear reactions. There are certain substances, you mix them together, they become volatile and they become potent and can be completely combustible to the point of destruction. Then at other times there are alloys, you bring them together, create an alloy, and it creates a much stronger and much more powerful substance. In experimentation, scientists have faced both. Sometimes you try to mix two things together and it's a fatal combination. And then times mixing together actually creates something even greater, like you have brass, or you have other different alloys that were created by mixture of different metals, or different other energies and other gases and so on. Okay. One more question, Mishpatim, about geirim, converts. How can people frown on marrying a ger, or having their child marry a ger, a convert, when it's prohibited to discriminate against geirim? In this week's Pasha, we are taught not to mistreat converts. But the community routinely mistreats geirim when it comes to shidduchim. Often, gezer Lubavitch. Well, there's another discussion. What is gezer Lubavitch? People who feel that they are blue blood Lubavitchers. Families prohibit their children from marrying geirim. Isn't this a direct avera based on the stated Torah law in this chapter? So yes, any discrimination against geirim that says 5 times special ava that you should show because you were once a ger, you were once a stranger in a strange land, meaning in Mitzrayim, so treat geirim with the proper respect and so on, and God forbid any discrimination or any lack of love or any difference. So I'm not going to defend people who have their own phobias about converts. The only thing I could say, and this is not in defense, is just pointing out something, and that is that the same is true sometimes with Balei Tshuva. And again, that same question carries over. The justification they have, and again, I'm not defending it because I don't see any issue at all, is they say their parents may have not been in a mikveh, there may be a situation with geirim that they come from, their genes come from non-Jewish sources, but the fact of the matter is a ger is actually a Jewish neshama that is just basically trapped or has wandered off or has been placed by God in the wrong place. I can't say the word wrong, that's not the right way to say it. That's why I say Gershin is Gayer. You don't say Goyshin is Gayer. Gershin is Gayer means a stranger, a soul for whatever deeper reason. And I again withdraw the word mistake. For some whatever reason, the wires of a Jewish soul ended up in a non-Jewish family. So in truth, it's a Jewish neshama. But some people will say, you know what, but the bottom line is the culture they grew up with, the religion they grew up with, the environment was a non-Jewish one. This is not a defense, but it's important to understand how people think. I would say that the fact is when we're connected with souls and neshamas, and we appreciate neshamas, and not just the cultural elements, we have a different attitude. But remember, this is not just about geirim or Balei Tshuva. It's about people in general who want their comfort zone. And very often don't think in the big picture. Their comfort zone is such that they're thinking in terms of what I like. And this has nothing to do with geirim and Balei Tshuva. There are people who don't want to marry certain families, even though there's no chash of any type of any issue of conversion or whatever their thoughts, their fears are. Why? Because people are culturally comfortable in their comfort zone. Is that the right way to look at a shidduch? Absolutely not. And you look at, of course, the people like throughout history, people like Moshe Rabbeinu, you look at Yaakov, who they married. They married families were not necessarily tzaddikim. But people are comfortable, and sometimes they feel that way. Unfortunately, I myself have dealt with situations where people felt they will marry families they know and end up being not such good situation. They married someone they didn't know, but it was good quality. So I would say a shidduch is based on the features and personality of a person. The fact that some people stereotype or some people discriminate is not in any way to be condoned or justified, especially in light of the spirit of Torah. But this is true in general. Even though we have the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael, love everyone, you see people they don't always do that. I don't want to speak negatively. They love sometimes only people that are like themselves, where they're comfortable. People agree with them. As soon as it's something that's not exactly like them, they don't like it. They don't trust different things. But this has nothing to do with geirim or any other form. It's just a matter of people's comfort zone. Is that a Torah approach? Of course not. You have to look at a situation, at the case by case, see the type of personality. I've seen beautiful weddings, marriages where geirim among geirim with non-geirim, etc. Meaning people born Jewish with people who converted to Judaism al pi halacha, and it's case by case. Is it something to be said that maybe two people who come from that background may have more commonality? You could say something like that, but I would never say it in a discriminatory way. That would be, they may be more compatible, they'll understand each other more. Just as, God forbid, different situations where people who have a similar situation, maybe makes more sense. Let's say people are divorced and they both have children. It may be easier than someone who's divorced marrying a person who's never been married. Even though we find beautiful marriages like that. And I absolutely admire them. I don't want any way to be taken what I'm saying out of context. My point is, however, when we're using das tachten and trying to make a shidduch, often you try to find people, similar situations, sometimes helps in the empathy, helps dealing with similar challenges. But by no means is this a justification for any type of discrimination. I hope I was clear about this. I also spoke about this a bit in episodes 47, 219, and 240. I'm sure this will elicit more questions, and we'll talk about them as well in time. Okay, with that, some more questions. And I again encourage you all to ask your questions. There is a backup. Yes, there is. I admit that. And I'm trying to connect them, like I think connected to a chapter or parsha are timely. I try to do them first. But I'm going in the order as they were received and bunching them together. So now we're going to talk about something that actually was related somewhat to a few episodes back when I spoke about my Rambam, the Rambam's yahrzeit on Chof Tevis. I believe it was episode, let me just remember, maybe 291, 292. But questions came in related to that. The first one's about discrepancies between Torah and science. So this isn't the first time we're discussing this, but it's a question that comes up time and again, so in new terms, maybe new details. So here's the question. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, can you please elaborate on the relationship between Torah and modern science? More specifically on facts stated that in the Gemara and other sources which are often found to be at odds with what we know of the world today. For example, the Gemara states that the gestation period of a snake is 7 years. However, we know of no snake whatsoever that gestates nearly that long. It can range from a few weeks to a few months, but nowhere near 7 years. There are many other facts throughout the Torah literature that contradict clearly observable phenomena. I know from reading the Rebbe's letters that his approach is that these things must not be taken metaphorically, being that everything in all of Torah is exact and true, and many of these things are applicable to halacha. Therefore, they must be taken literally. I know there are also places where the Rebbe explains some phenomena, such as spontaneously generating worms as true even though there's no evidence, and as absence of evidence does not mean evidence of absence. First of all, the answer does not sit well with me, for one, because there are so many of these instances, Talmudic statements at odds with modern knowledge, yet zero evidence of them being true. But also because it is quite a weak argument to base things off of. We generally do not say absurd things must be true simply because there's no evidence of absence. Essentially, why must we insist on holding statements which nowadays seem patently absurd to be true simply because the ancient sages believed them to be? I know the Rebbe's argument is that it was really all given to Moshe at Sinai, but it just doesn't satisfy. If we look at many of these statements in the Gemara and later works, and compare them with secular scholars of the time, these seem to fall neatly into context. On the face of it, it seems that the sages simply studied the various fields of the time and thus were aware of these works. So it seems that we are denying this possibility and instead insisting on holding these statements to be true even today, when we are aware that there is no evidence of them because the sages said so. Perhaps they would have said differently with our updated knowledge, just as they reflected the scholars of their time. It is essential to insist that it is all from Sinai. How do we reconcile this? Okay. So I have discussed this in the past, back in 291, went into it briefly, especially in episode 130. So let's clarify a few points. Number one, I want to refer you to Likutei Sichos Chelik Chav Gimel, volume 23, the Sich on Shavuos. This was based on a chassidus where the Rebbe spoke at length about the idea of Nishtanu Hativim. Did things change from the time of the Talmud? And what about the Torah Nitzchis, the eternity of Torah, when we're talking about matters like you're describing and others? So let's explain. The Rebbe's adamance is not just some type of, God forbid, stubbornness. We're dealing here with Torah. When you start tampering with Torah, let's say based on our logic, then where do you stop? What happens if today there's a theory, a scientific theory that seems to contradict Torah, and in 50 years from now that theory changes, and you go back and the Torah theory holds up? What the Rebbe wanted to avoid by all means was humans with their logic starting to tamper and say, oh, let's change this, let's change that. There are certain things that are established that Torah says so. Regarding the actual nature of things, first of all, the Torah itself says it's given permission to doctors to heal. And doctors healing today is very different than doctors healing 1,000 years ago. That's why the medications suggested in the Talmud, the Chazal and Poskim say, is Nishtanu Hativim. Nature has changed. So there could be, nature has changed, for example, even the snake you mentioned, maybe there was a snake like that, a prehistoric one, back then. The point is we're holding on, not because we're looking for an absurd thing and then hold on, and because there's evidence. There's no absence of evidence because there's absence of evidence. No. It's because the Torah says so. So we have something to stand on. And the Torah's statement has more validity than all the science in the world because science is theories. And science changes. The Torah doesn't change. When there's a contradiction, either we have to dig deeper in the Torah and see what it means, or we have to look in science and see maybe there's a different theories. That's the approach of the Rebbe. And there are things that in Gashmi, so Elam, as the Rebbe explains there, today do not hold up, even though the Torah says this is the way it is in Chazal, it does not come down physically. That's why Medaber is Bel Yenin, the Torah speaks about things on lofty levels. But to just easily and give license to just without too much effort, say, you know what, something doesn't seem to fit, change it. We'll open up the Pandora's box, so you can go ahead and change all the Torah, because a lot of things you could say today we shouldn't wash Negelwasser. Why? Because that what Torah talks about, the toxins and so on, we know today doesn't exist. Maybe they're spiritual toxins. I mean, I can go on and on. So I think the approach has to be as such, as knowing that Torah is divine blueprint for life. Are there details in the Torah that perhaps don't manifest physically? Yes, absolutely. The Rebbe speaks about that too. Do we just say that about everything? We make it easy? No. There's the whole talk about Shabbos. That maybe the 6 days of the week were not really 24-hour days. And that's how you can explain the age of the universe far more than 5,780 years. The Rebbe rejects it because of the days or different days. Shabbos is based on 7 24-hour days as time is today. So you could say there's another way to look at it. And there are those that look at it that way. But when you take Torah, you start tampering with that, then the next thing you can do is tamper with other things as well. So if to know that Torah is God's blueprint for life, that's the most important thing to know. Then God gave Chachma Bagoyim Tamin. There is wisdom by science, medicine, and others. And they can develop theories and develop medication that didn't exist in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, didn't exist in the time of Shas. And they actually help people's lives. They save lives. They fight disease. They provide for higher age expectancy. We don't say don't use it because the Torah doesn't say so. Those instances where the Torah says something and it doesn't seem we have evidence of, because the Torah says we're careful. We're careful to try to suggest that it maybe exists physically or maybe it doesn't exist and it became extinct, or something changed in nature, not in Torah. Or we say Medaber is Bel Yenim, or I should say, because it's always Bel Yenim, that in a certain spiritual place, that reality exists. That's the general gist of it. And it's a very healthy approach because it's built again on axioms. Now, one more point I've made and I make again, wisdom in the world, scientific wisdom that holds up and goes through the rigorous process of science is also understanding God's mind. Scientists say that. We're understanding how God used God's design and God's mind to create this universe and its rules and laws. So the same God that gave Torah and told us how to use the universe, what purpose it has, how to do a mitzvah, how to elevate the universe, also told us, also created a world with a method, with a science, with a strategy, with design. And when we are seeking to understand that design and actually manipulate it for the betterment of mankind, the humankind, that's also part of developing God's universe. So if we have new technologies that help us harvest grain, or other technologies that help us in medicine, or help us with other things in human needs, and we elevate it, everything is l'kvede, to honor God, including technology, that's also part of God's plan. So it's one God that manifests in different ways. Torah is telling us what to do with our lives. And science tells us what is the way that God created the universe. What makes it tick? How can we make that work for us to improve our lives? How can we transcend time and space to technology, communications, and so on? Okay, another question in the same spirit was why not study different belief systems before determining what is truth? Why do we not do what Yisrael did and look into other forms of worship? So the story, of course, is 2 weeks ago we read that before Matan Torah, Yisrael came. Why Yisrael? Because Yisrael was a person who was a scientist, a wizard, a sorcerer, whatever you want to call him, a person who knew all the wisdoms of the world, and he said, Ati Adaiti, Kavaya, Godel Mekol Elokim. Now I know that Havaya, your God, Elokeichem, your God is greater than all the gods, meaning all those that are worshipped everywhere. So the questioner is asking, why not learn from that? Let's look at other forms of worship and then come to understand Judaism. We see that Yisrael is praised because he tried every avodah zarah, every form of idolatry. But then he came to the conclusion that Hashem is the real God. That seems to be a proper way to determine the truth, through listening to all ideas and determine which one is true, which is also what dayanim and judges are required to do when determining justice and truth. Yes, there's a law that they learn laws of avodah zarah because they need to know how to rule on it. Why aren't we obligated to take the same route? Instead, such an approach is mostly discouraged. Why is that? When trying to determine the truth, it is important to hear from